He was 96 years old and he had driven 81 miles per hour down Route 6 because his son was dying. That was the fact at the center of everything. Not the speed, not the violation, not the citation that a state trooper had written out with professional efficiency on the side of a Connecticut highway at 6:40 in the morning. The fact was a father and a son, and the specific, ancient, irreducible terror of arriving too late. Walter Hutchins sat at the defendant's table in Providence Municipal Court, wearing a brown cardigan that his late wife had given him for Christmas 11 years ago. It still fit. He had combed his white hair carefully. His hands, spotted with age and trembling faintly at the knuckles, rested on the table in front of him as though he were sitting in a church pew, patient, dignified, and very, very tired. He had driven himself to court, alone, at 96. The citation officer read the violation with the flat neutrality of someone processing a routine case. Speeding. 41 miles per hour over the posted limit. A mandatory appearance. Potential license suspension. Across the gallery, a few people shifted in their seats. One woman near the back pressed her lips together. A young man 2 rows forward stopped scrolling his phone and looked up at Walter Hutchins and didn't look away again. Before this story goes any further, if you have ever loved someone so much that fear made you fearless, leave a comment below right now. Because what Judge Frank Caprio says to this man in the next few minutes is something that will stay with you long after this video ends. Subscribe if you believe that mercy and justice are not opposites, that sometimes they are exactly the same thing. Judge Frank Caprio looked at the file. He looked at Walter. He set the file down. There was a particular gentleness that came into his face. Not pity, which can be a form of distance, but something closer and warmer than that. Recognition, perhaps. The look of one human being seeing another with complete clarity. "Mr. Hutchins," he said, "can you tell me what was happening that morning?" Walter straightened in his chair. He had the posture of a man from a generation that considered composure a form of respect. "My son Thomas," he said, his voice steady but thin, like a wire stretched over a long distance. "He had a cardiac event the night before. They called me at 4 in the morning. He's in the hospital in Providence. I live in Putnam." He paused. "I drove fast. I know I drove fast. I'm not going to say I didn't." There was a sound in the gallery, not quite a gasp, not quite a sigh, something in between. The kind of sound a room makes when it feels something collectively and has no word for it. The citation officer, to his credit, said nothing. He looked at his clipboard and then looked at the floor. That's when everything changed. Because Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly and asked the question that no one in a courtroom thinks to ask, the question that transforms a legal proceeding into something human. Did you make it in time? Walter Hutchins' composure, which had held through the reading of the citation and the formality of the appearance and the exhaustion of a man who had been awake for 30-some hours, wavered for just a moment. Just one moment. His chin dropped a fraction of an inch. His hands pressed flat against the table. And then he looked up, and there was something in his eyes that could not be named but could absolutely be felt by every single person in that room. "He was awake when I got there," Walter said. "He knew I came." The courtroom went completely, profoundly silent. Not the silence of discomfort. Not the silence of bureaucratic pause. The silence of a room that has just been handed something sacred and knows instinctively to be still. In the back row, the woman who had pressed her lips together was now pressing her fingers to them instead. The young man who had stopped scrolling had not moved in 4 minutes. The citation officer cleared his throat once and then seemed to decide against whatever he had been about to say. Judge Caprio was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the citation. He looked at Walter Hutchins, this 96-year-old man in his late wife's Christmas cardigan who had driven 81 miles per hour in the dark because love, at its most essential, does not calculate risk. It simply moves. And then Judge Caprio said quietly, in a voice that carried to every corner of that room without ever being raised, "There is no fine in this world worth more than a son knowing his father came." He dismissed the citation entirely, every charge, fully and without condition. But he did not stop there. He looked at Walter with an expression that had moved beyond judicial into something purely personal, and he said, "How is Thomas today?" Walter allowed himself for the first time a small and exhausted smile. "Stable," he said. "They think he's going to be all right." The gallery responded in a way that galleries in municipal court almost never respond. Not with applause, this was not a performance. With something quieter and more genuine. With the collective exhale of people who came in strangers and were leaving, somehow, a little more human than before. Judge Caprio asked his clerk to ensure that Walter had someone to drive him home. He noted, gently and without condescension, that the roads at 96 required company, especially after a night like the one Walter had survived. He said it as one man to another. Walter nodded. He said he had a neighbor waiting outside. Before Walter Hutchins stood to leave, Judge Caprio looked at him one final time and said simply, "Tell Thomas his father is a good man." Walter stood slowly, the way men of 96 stand, with intention and without apology. He buttoned his cardigan. He picked up his hat from the table beside him. He said, "Thank you, Your Honor," in a voice that meant something larger than those 3 words have ever been required to carry. He walked out of that courtroom the same way he had driven down Route 6 in the dark, steadily, purposefully, and entirely without regret. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at Providence Municipal Court addressed to Judge Frank Caprio. It was written in a careful, slightly shaking hand. It was from Thomas Hutchins. It said that he was recovering. It said that his father had told him what happened in the courtroom. It said, in its final line, "I always knew he'd come. I just didn't know the whole city would be there with him." Judge Caprio kept the letter. Some laws are written in statutes. Some are written in the distance. A father will drive in the dark for the chance to hold his son's hand one more time. Both matter, but only one of them tells you who we really are. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love is still the most powerful force in any room. Leave a comment telling me what Judge Caprio's words meant to you. Like this video if you believe Walter Hutchins did exactly the right thing. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now, because every week we find the moments where humanity shows up, sits down, and reminds us all why it's worth protecting.